"Deborah, you can't just waltz onto my property with that master key like you own the place," I said, keeping my tone firm but careful. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked concrete of the driveway, and the smell of pine from the backyard pressed softly against my senses. And that alarm? It's not just some noisemaker. Every motion sensor, every camera is still hooked up to my server. Every single step you take is being tracked. She narrowed her eyes, glancing sideways at the device clipped to her belt. "Jason, you're making this personal. It's HOA protocol. We have the right to ensure compliance." "Protocol?" I laughed, a short, dry sound. "Doesn't mean jack when you're trampling over someone's home and family legacy. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments." My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. The alert flashing on the screen showed the message had just been sent. The HOA's insurance provider had been notified of unauthorized entry. I swallowed hard and looked Deborah straight in the eye. "I'm Jason Caldwell," I said slowly, weighing every word. "This house? It's the place my father built with his own two hands, brick by brick. The neighborhood started because of him, long before your board ever got its grubby fingers on it. So don't come here thinking you can scare me off with rules and empty threats." I paused, feeling the weight of the cedar bench behind me, nestled beneath the old maple tree in the backyard, the one Dad made the summer I was 12. The bench wasn't just a place to sit, it was a memory carved in wood, where family stories were told, where my mother's soft voice echoed in the evening breeze. It was home. I'm not just fighting for a piece of land. I'm fighting for a piece of my family, the history, the blood, the sweat that poured into every nail and timber here. Deborah shifted uneasily but masked it with a practiced smile. "The board only wants what's best for the community. You know that. You could have avoided this if you followed the procedures." "Followed procedures?" I shook my head, stepping forward. "They never sent me a proper notice about the changes they want. Or the fines piling up. It's all backdoor bullying, and it's got nothing to do with community." The neighbor's fence swayed lightly in the wind, and I thought of the creek running just beyond my property line, a place my dad used to take me fishing, where he taught me how to be patient, how to stand firm. That creek was more than water flowing through rocks. It was a testament to persistence, to roots that run deeper than any HOA regulation. I looked back at Deborah. "You want to know why you can't control me? Because I own the tech this whole neighborhood depends on. The smart alarm system, the sensors, the cameras. You think that motion sensor is just your property? It's connected to my server. Every byte of data is mine." Her face tightened. "You're overstepping, Jason." "No," I said quietly. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." My voice cracked a little, not from weakness, but from the raw emotion behind years of family memories tied to this place. The letters Mom wrote, folded neatly in the drawer of the old oak desk in the study. The scent of cedar from that bench, faint but unmistakable, like a promise from the past. This house wasn't just walls and roof. It was my inheritance of love, loss, and legacy. Deborah glanced down, fiddling with her clipboard, clearly searching for something to say, but the words caught in her throat. "Look," I softened a fraction. "I'm not just some angry neighbor. I'm a software engineer, yes, but more than that. I'm the son of a man who poured everything into this community, and I refuse to let some bureaucratic nightmare take that away." I took a breath, feeling the knot in my chest loosen just a little. "Now, before this goes any further, where are you watching this from?" I said, looking directly into the camera lens that recorded the whole interaction. "And if you want to see how this fight unfolds, you better hit subscribe, 'cause trust me, you're gonna want to watch this one." The quiet hum of the neighborhood buzzed around us. Children's laughter faint from down the street, the clink of a bicycle bell, a stark contrast to the tension hanging between me and Deborah. I thought about the bench again, the place where I'd spent countless summer evenings, listening to my father's stories about building this neighborhood from scratch, how he fought hard to protect our family's land against outsiders, against greedy developers. How those stories had shaped me into someone who doesn't back down. This was my home, but more importantly, it was my family's heart. And no HOA policy, no matter how many letters or threats, was going to change that. The moment Deborah left, I stood by that cedar bench for a long time. The late sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the cracked wood. It creaked faintly under my fingers, like it knew every secret this place held. I swear that bench remembers more about my family than any HOA rulebook ever could. A couple days later, the letters started arriving. Not the friendly kind either. One after another. Notices about non-compliance, unauthorized modifications, even something about the color of my front door trim. I swear, they'd have complained if I'd painted it purple and danced on the porch. Simone Brandt, the HOA president, was relentless. I didn't know much about her at first, except that she had this air like she'd swallowed the neighborhood's rulebook whole and was now on a mission to enforce it like some sort of sheriff. Last I checked, though, this wasn't a Wild West town, and I wasn't a wanted outlaw. A week after Deborah's attempted entry, I ran into Simone at the community garden. Her sharp heels clicked on the pavement as she approached, eyes fixed like a hawk. "Jason, we need to discuss your fence," she said without preamble. "It's outside the approved style. You've been given ample warnings." I met her gaze, refusing to back down. "That fence was grandfathered in by my dad long before you took over this board. It's part of the neighborhood's history, just like that cedar bench you seem to overlook." Her lips pressed thin. "Your personal attachment doesn't exempt you from the rules. We're maintaining community standards here." "Community standards, huh?" I remembered the cracked mailbox at the end of the street that had been there since the 70s, covered in peeling paint and rust. Guess that wasn't part of the community standards. I wanted to say as much, but held my tongue. Instead, I asked, "So, what happens if I don't change it?" She smiled, but it was all teeth. No warmth. "Fines will accumulate. If unpaid, they escalate to liens on your property. We take these matters seriously." That word, liens, hit me like a punch. I'd seen what that meant for some neighbors. It wasn't just money. It was control. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the fence bathed in moonlight. I felt that familiar ache, the one tied to Dad's hands. The evenings he spent hammering nails into that wood, telling me stories about fighting for every inch of this land. This wasn't just about a fence, it was about preserving a legacy. I started digging through HOA documents online, their bylaws, amendments, meeting minutes. The more I read, the more I realized how tangled the rules were. Some were legitimate, sure, but others felt crafted to squeeze people out, to make homeowners bend until they snapped. A phone call changed everything. My friend Leah, a real estate lawyer, warned me, "Jason, you're dealing with a board that's got no qualms pushing boundaries. They'll use every loophole to get what they want. You need to document everything, every letter, every conversation." Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge beneath. This wasn't a casual warning, it was a call to arms. That weekend I hosted a small barbecue, hoping to get to know some neighbors better, figure out who was who in this quiet war zone. Simone didn't show, but word spread quickly about my defiance. Some neighbors gave me cautious smiles, others whispered about the new troublemaker. Among them was Laura, a neighbor who used to be friendly with my family. She kept her distance but caught my eye once or twice, her smile tight, a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. I felt she was watching, waiting. I figured it out later. Not everyone on the HOA board was as cold as Simone. Days turned into a blur of notices and calls. I started responding, carefully, letters back explaining my rights, pointing to grandfather clauses, referencing state laws. I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was making a stand. Every time I got a new letter, I felt that sting, like they were poking at some part of me I couldn't just ignore. But with each response I sent, I also felt a surge, a spark of control. One afternoon, I found myself back at the bench. This time, the wind carried the faint smell of cedar mixed with pine needles. It was grounding, reminded me who I was and why this fight mattered. "Legacy," I whispered to the empty yard, "isn't given, it's earned. And I'm not about to hand it over to people who see this place as just lines on a spreadsheet." The battle was just beginning. The backyard had started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. Every glance over my shoulder made me wonder who was watching. That cedar bench, once a place of comfort, now seemed to hold silent witnesses to a war I hadn't asked for. One evening, Laura showed up. She was quiet. Too quiet. She never said much at first, just lingered at the edge of conversations, fingers nervously twisting her bracelet, eyes darting like she was carrying secrets heavier than words. We ran into each other near the community garden, the same one Simone had ambushed me at last week. The scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers couldn't mask the tension between us. "Jason," she said softly, voice barely above the hum of cicadas, "I don't agree with all of this. What the board's doing." I watched her carefully, catching the hesitation in her eyes. "You don't?" I asked, trying not to sound hopeful. Laura shook her head. "They're strict. Overbearing even. I'm on the board, you know. But it's not all black and white. Sometimes I feel trapped. Like I'm watching a train wreck but can't pull the brakes." Her hands trembled just slightly as she spoke, fingers tightening around a stray leaf she plucked from the garden bed. I wanted to believe her, needed to, because this fight wasn't just about me, it was about every family getting caught in the crossfire. Days later, during an HOA meeting, Laura sat beside me for the first time instead of across the table. She was quieter than usual, but her presence felt like a shield. Simone was her usual sharp self, cutting through questions with a cold precision that made everyone else shrink back. But Laura's eyes flickered with something different, a flicker of doubt, maybe guilt. After the meeting, Laura pulled me aside. "Jason, you've got to document everything, the letters, the calls, even the little things. They're building a case against you and maybe others too." Her voice cracked on that last word. I could see the weight she was carrying, the conflict between loyalty and truth. "I've seen them push people out," Laura whispered. "Not legally, at least not yet, but by wearing them down, making life miserable. It's subtle, but it's there." Her confession hit harder than any fine notice or official letter. I nodded slowly. "That's why I'm not backing down. For Dad, for all of us." Laura glanced toward the street, lowering her voice. "If you ever need someone on the inside, I'm here." She slipped away before I could ask more, leaving me standing by that old cedar bench. The wind rustled through the maple leaves above, a soft whisper that felt almost like encouragement. From then on, Laura became an unspoken ally. She'd catch my eye during meetings, offering silent support or a barely perceptible nod when Simone pushed too hard. Her struggle was real, and I wasn't about to let her stand alone. Meanwhile, Simone escalated. Notices piled higher, accusations sharper. I wasn't just a neighbor now. I was the problem, the thorn in her side. One afternoon, a letter arrived, accusing me of unauthorized landscaping changes. They said I'd planted invasive species near the creek behind my property. I laughed bitterly. The creek was where Dad taught me patience, where he showed me how life kept moving even through the toughest storms. Now, the HOA was trying to turn that into a battleground. I called Leia again, who told me to gather photos, expert opinions, whatever proof I could find. "They're playing dirty," she said, "but you've got something they don't. History and evidence." As I walked the property, I couldn't help but touch the rough bark of the maple tree near the creek, its roots digging deep into the earth, just like my family's roots here. It was more than a tree. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no amount of paperwork or intimidation could erase what was grown over decades. That night, after the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura sent a text. It was short but meaningful. "Be careful, not everyone on the board plays by the rules." Her words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. The battle was growing, and so was the distance between neighbors. Some whispered support, others looked away, but with Laura's quiet courage, I felt a little less alone. One thing was clear, this fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up when silence only helps those in power. And standing up was exactly what I intended to do. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's standing with me. And don't miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. This fight's only getting started. The day Meredith showed up, the tension I'd been holding at bay snapped like a dry twig underfoot. I was in the middle of fixing the kitchen sink when I heard the sharp knock. 3 quick raps that echoed through the house like a warning. Opening the door, I found her standing there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses shading eyes that didn't quite hide the smug satisfaction underneath. Meredith was the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, the kind of person who thrived on power trips and petty invasions. "I'm here to do an inspection," she said, voice clipped. "We have reports of unauthorized modifications inside your home." I barely kept my mouth from twisting into a smirk. Unauthorized modifications. Meredith, the only thing I've modified here is the faucet, and that was a leak from last winter. You want to see the receipt? She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a metronome counting down my patience. Mr. Caldwell, she said, scanning the room like she was judging every detail, this isn't just about plumbing, it's about compliance. We have the right to verify. I felt the familiar surge, that mix of anger and resolve, and glanced toward the security camera blinking quietly in the corner. Meredith had no idea her every move was being recorded, backed up to a server only I controlled. Funny you mention rights, I said, voice low but steady. That motion sensor over there? Still connected to my system. Every step you take, every word you say, recorded. She froze for a fraction of a second, lips parting as if to say something, then closed them tight. You're overstepping. No, I shot back. I'm protecting my home. That's when my phone buzzed. A text already on its way to the HOA's insurance provider. A digital record of unauthorized entry, right from Meredith's own footsteps. She stormed out, but I wasn't done. I grabbed my coat and headed straight to the backyard. The late afternoon sun filtered through the maple leaves, casting long shadows on the cedar bench Dad had built years ago. That bench wasn't just wood, it was history, every scratch and dent a story. I sat down, letting the weight of everything settle in. Meredith's intrusion wasn't just a violation of privacy, it was a direct assault on family legacy. The same legacy Simone and her board seemed hell-bent on erasing. That night I called Leah again. They're escalating, I told her. First letters, now break-ins under the guise of inspections. Leah's voice was calm but serious. Jason, you need to document every interaction. This isn't just petty enforcement, it's harassment. We'll use it. The next day I started gathering proof. Timestamps from the alarm system, video clips of Meredith's unauthorized entry, copies of HOA notices. It was tedious, but every piece was a brick in my defense. Meanwhile, Laura reached out. She slid an envelope under my door. Inside, copies of emails between Simone and the board discussing tightening control and targeting non-compliant members. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. Not everyone's on their side, Laura said in a quick text later. Use this. I stared at those pages late into the night, the ink smeared in places like a whispered confession. Each move the HOA made seemed calculated, cold, but beneath it all, I caught a flicker of fear. Fear that their grip was slipping, and I was the catalyst. The neighborhood began to shift. Conversations stopped when I walked by, neighbors throwing cautious glances but saying little. Support was quiet but growing. That cedar bench remained my refuge. I traced my fingers over its worn surface, reminding myself why I fought. It was more than nostalgia, it was a declaration. This place, this family's story, wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't just defending a house, I was defending a legacy. And with every petty attempt they made to bully me, I only grew stronger. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The power flickered twice, and I sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, staring at the stack of documents Laura had slipped under my door. The words on those pages weren't just ink. They were secrets whispered in shadows, evidence of the HOA's true intentions. I decided to search for more, somewhere deeper than emails and letters, somewhere tangible. The basement door creaked as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Musty, damp, a mix of old wood and forgotten memories. Boxes lined the shelves, dust settling thick on their lids like years of silence. Fingers trembling slightly, I pulled down a battered cardboard box labeled Dad's Papers. The lid stuck, and the faint scrape echoed through the room. I peeled it back, revealing stacks of handwritten notes, faded photographs, and yellowed blueprints. My heart thudded. This wasn't just family history. It was proof of ownership, rights, and battles fought long before me. A loose paper slipped out, catching the weak light. A hand-drawn map of the property lines, detailed annotations in Dad's neat script, and a scribbled note warning about potential land grabs and corporate interests eyeing the creek. I traced the ink, feeling my father's presence in every stroke. The basement floor groaned beneath me, the only company a flickering bulb casting jittery shadows in the walls. The air was thick, heavy with secrets I'd never known. Somewhere between the dust and silence, a folded envelope caught my eye. Inside, letters from past HOA meetings, letters where Dad had challenged the board's attempts to encroach on our land. His words were sharp, unwavering, a testament to a man who never backed down. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. The fight was never new. It was a legacy passed down. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows like a warning. Suddenly, footsteps, soft but certain, echoed from the stairs. My heart jumped, but I held my ground. "Jason?" Laura's voice trembled at the threshold. "I was worried about you," she said, stepping into the dim light. "This place, it's full of ghosts." I nodded, sliding the letters toward her. "Ghosts I'm ready to face." She swallowed hard, eyes scanning the papers. "There's more than just memories here. These could stop Simone and her crew." Her words sparked a new fire in me. "We need to be careful," I warned. "If they catch wind of this, they'll come down harder." Laura hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small USB drive. "I found this on Simone's desk last week. Emails, recordings, enough to expose a lot." I stared at it, disbelief and hope warring inside me. "Looks like you're not alone in this fight," she whispered. The next few days blurred. Between work, calls to Leia, and cataloging every piece of evidence, the pressure built. But now I had something real, something concrete. Every time I passed that cedar bench, I felt the weight of history grounding me. Dad's voice echoed in my mind. "Keep fighting, no matter what." These basement, these papers, they were a reminder that my fight was part of something bigger. As the storm outside rattled the windows, I made a promise to honor that legacy, to protect this home. And with Laura's help, I was ready to turn the tide. The morning after the basement discovery, I met with Leah in a cramped coffee shop just outside town. The air smelled of burnt espresso and faded paperbacks, a quiet refuge from the chaos I was living in. Leah's eyes flicked over the documents and the USB drive Laura had given me. She tapped a pen against the table, thoughtful. "This is solid," she said, voice low but sharp. "Emails revealing the HOA's plans, recordings that could expose collusion. This isn't just about you anymore, it's systemic." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Relief because we had ammunition. Dread because I knew how ruthless Simone and her cronies could be when cornered. Leah leaned closer. "You need to get an expert on property law involved. Someone who understands the local ordinances and can interpret those blueprints and notes your father left." Later that afternoon, I reached out to an old family friend, Mark, a retired surveyor with decades of experience. He agreed to come by the next day to examine the papers and the property boundaries. While waiting, I found myself back at the cedar bench, running my hands along the weathered wood. It wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol of every quiet moment my family had spent here. The laughter, the tears, the stories passed down. It reminded me what was at stake. Mark arrived early the next morning, carrying a well-worn briefcase and a keen eye. We walked the property together, measuring lines, comparing maps, and debating the intricacies of easements and encroachments. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern as he examined the documents and the land. "Jason," he said finally, "your father's records are thorough. If this fight goes to court, this could be the backbone of your case. There's proof here that the HOA is trying to overstep boundaries, legally protected." Hearing that, a knot in my stomach loosened. Meanwhile, Laura continued to send me snippets of board meeting minutes, private messages hinting at insurance manipulations and underhanded tactics. Her help was quiet but crucial, like a whisper in the storm. Yet the tension wasn't just legal. One afternoon, I noticed strange activity around the neighborhood. Unfamiliar cars parked near my driveway, a drone buzzing overhead. The fight was getting more intense, and surveillance felt less like protection and more like intimidation. I installed extra cameras around the property, feeding live footage back to my server. Every move the HOA made, every face that appeared near my home was being watched now. And that night, exhaustion pulled me towards sleep, but my mind raced. I thought about the maple tree by the creek, its roots twisting deep into the earth, weathering seasons and storms. Like that tree, I needed to anchor myself, to grow stronger no matter the pressure. A message from Laura popped up on my phone. Be ready, things are about to escalate. But you're not alone. Her words were a lifeline. The fight had moved beyond papers and phone calls. It was becoming a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. And I was ready. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location below. I want to see who's standing in this fight with me. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. Because the next moves, they're about to shake everything up. Don't miss it. The board meeting was set for Thursday evening. Simone had made it clear this wasn't just about fines or fences anymore. It was about crushing dissent. I spent the days leading up to it planning every detail, not just what I'd say, but how I'd prove it. The emails Laura had smuggled to me, the recordings of Meredith's illegal entry, Mark's expert survey report, all lined up like a well-oiled arsenal. Laura dropped by late one afternoon, looking nervous but resolute. "Jason," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, "you're gonna need this." She handed me a small recorder. "Simone's been making phone calls, things she doesn't want on paper." I nodded, tucking it into my coat pocket. This is gonna change the game. On the night of the meeting, the community center buzzed with tension. Neighbors packed the room, some curious, others wary. Simone stood at the podium, eyes cold and calculating. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, feeling the weight of every stare. I didn't just speak, I laid out the evidence, piece by piece. The emails showing the board's secret plans to pressure homeowners, the video of Meredith's unauthorized entry, timed and tagged, Mark's report proving their attempts to rewrite property boundaries. People leaned in, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Then I played the recording Laura gave me. Simone's voice, sharp and unguarded, discussing making examples out of people who don't comply. The room shifted, faces paled, murmurs turned into whispers. Laura sat beside me, hands clenched but eyes bright. The conflicted board member had become my strongest ally. Simone tried to regain control, but the tide had turned. She stumbled over excuses, her confidence cracked. When the floor opened for questions, neighbors stood up, voices shaking with anger and betrayal. Stories poured out, fines they never knew about, inspections that felt more like harassment, threats thinly veiled behind community standards. That old mailbox cracked and rusted down the street? Forgotten. The invasive plant accusations against me? A joke compared to their tactics. I watched as unity formed, not just for me, but for all of us. By the end, Simone's grip on the board was shattered. The community voted for an independent audit and reforms. As people filed out, Laura whispered, "You did this." I shook my head. We did this, together. Later, back by the cedar bench, I traced the worn wood, the scars of time telling stories older than me. This victory wasn't just mine. It was a promise to my family, to this neighborhood. And though the battle wasn't over, tonight was ours. The air was thick with tension the morning after the meeting. I woke early, restless, fingers tracing the familiar grooves of the cedar bench on the back porch. The wood felt rough but steady, like the foundation I was fighting to protect. News of the HOA board's near consensual spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Simone was quiet for now, the usual sharp tone replaced by a careful silence. Rumors floated of lawyers being consulted, desperate plans hatched behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the community's mood shifted. I caught neighbors exchanging furtive smiles, nods of encouragement. Even the quiet ones who'd stayed neutral before seemed to lean my way. Laura stopped by with a cup of coffee and a folder thick with new documents she'd acquired. Emails, financial records, even invoices hinting at insurance claims filed under questionable circumstances. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. "This goes deeper than we thought," she said, her voice low but firm. "They're trying to protect themselves, not the community." Leah confirmed the legal implications after reviewing everything. These could show a pattern of fraud or at least gross mismanagement. If we play this right, it'll not only end Simone's reign, but reform the entire HOA. That afternoon, I set up a meeting with a local news reporter Leah had recommended. The story needed to get out, beyond quiet whispers and closed doors. The interview was nerve-wracking. Sitting in front of the camera, I felt the weight of every word, every memory tied to this house, the bench where Dad told stories, the creek where he taught me to stand firm. I spoke about legacy, fairness, and the right to call a place home without fear of being bullied. Days later, the segment aired. It was raw, honest, and it resonated. Suddenly, calls and messages poured in. Neighbors from other blocks shared similar stories of HOA abuse. The momentum was building. But Simone wasn't done. She called an emergency board meeting, hoping to regain control. Instead, faced with mounting evidence and public scrutiny, the remaining board members voted unanimously to suspend her pending a full investigation. The news hit the community like a shockwave. Some cheered, others, loyal to the old ways, grumbled. At the neighborhood picnic that weekend, I spotted familiar faces, some shy, some bold, coming together not just to celebrate, but to heal. The bench, weathered but strong, was the centerpiece, a silent witness to our small victory. Laura caught my eye and smiled, her earlier hesitation replaced by quiet pride. In that moment, I realized this fight was never about me alone. It was about reclaiming dignity, for my family, for every homeowner who'd felt powerless. And while the road ahead was still long, for the first time in months, I felt hope. The cedar bench creaked softly beneath me as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the neighborhood, a promise of new beginnings. The morning after the neighborhood picnic, the air felt different, charged, alive. I was on the porch, the cedar bench beneath me worn smooth from years of use, its familiar grooves grounding me. Around the block, neighbors talked more openly, voices carrying from lawns and driveways, not whispers this time, real conversations. Laura caught my eye across the street. She was in the middle of a small group, animatedly explaining something. When she saw me, she smiled and waved me over. The last few weeks had transformed her from a silent observer to a quiet leader. "You can feel it, right?" she asked, her voice low but urgent once I was close enough. I nodded. Yeah, like the neighborhood's waking up after a long sleep. But awakening brought its own turbulence. The next day, I found an ominous flyer taped to the lamppost outside my house. Bold letters warned, "Back off or face the consequences." No signature, just sharp edges of threat. I stuffed it in my jacket pocket, feeling a mix of irritation and resolve. Leah had warned me. Being the face of the fight meant becoming a target. "Don't let it shake you," she said over the phone, "but stay cautious." The flyer wasn't the only sign. Strange cars started circling the block. Once, a drone hovered low, its buzzing piercing the afternoon calm. It felt less like protection and more like surveillance, a reminder that the HOA's grip was tightening even as their power was slipping. Laura came by that afternoon, her face shadowed with worry but determined. She handed me a thick packet of documents, emails, memos, and internal messages from the HOA, revealing attempts to influence upcoming local elections. Their goal was clear: keep the board full of loyalists who'd maintain the old ways, suppress change, and intimidate dissenters. "This isn't just petty power plays," Laura said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's systematic control." I leafed through the papers, each page peeling back another layer of deception. Days later, the community meeting was packed. The church hall hummed with nervous energy. Families crammed into every seat, some clutching cups of lukewarm coffee, others exchanging tentative glances. Many had never attended before, their silence a symptom of fear or resignation. When I stepped up to speak, I wasn't just a neighbor. I was a protector of legacies. My father's legacy, the legacy of every homeowner who'd endured unjust fines, invasive inspections, and threats disguised as community standards. I told them about the cedar bench, worn from years of family gatherings, about the creek where my father taught me to stand steady against the flow. I spoke about fairness, about reclaiming dignity from those who wielded power unfairly. Voices rose after me, stories poured out. Neighbors recounted hidden fees, unannounced meetings, and the constant pressure to conform or be punished. The atmosphere shifted from quiet frustration to fierce determination. Laura, once hesitant and silent, stood beside me, lending strength to the collective voice rising in that room. Plans formed quickly: transparent elections, community oversight committees, and an open forum where grievances could be aired without fear of retaliation. But shadows lingered. Simone's influence hadn't vanished. Whispers of lawsuits and counterattacks floated in the air like a storm waiting to break. The old guard on the board muttered threats in back hallways, their desperation growing with every lost supporter. One evening I wandered down to the creek, the soft murmur of water calming the turmoil in my mind. I pressed my palm against the gnarled bark of the maple tree standing sentinel over the bank, its twisted roots digging deep into the earth. That tree had weathered countless storms, standing firm no matter how hard the wind blew. It reminded me that resilience wasn't about never breaking, it was about bending without snapping, standing tall through adversity. As dusk settled, my phone buzzed. Leah's name flashed on the screen. "Jason, whatever you do next, be ready. They're gearing up for a fight that'll get ugly." Her warning hit hard, but I was ready. Months of frustration, late nights, and small victories had forged something inside me. This wasn't just about a fence or a fine anymore. It was about protecting what mattered: family, home, dignity. The community was standing with me now, growing stronger by the day. And no matter how dark the road ahead might seem, I knew one thing for certain: we weren't backing down. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location below. I want to know who's standing strong in this fight. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Things are about to get real intense. Stay with me. The days after the neighborhood meeting settled into a tense, uneasy rhythm. The victory we'd won was real, but the battle was far from over. Simone, once silenced, was regrouping. The air was thick with whispered threats and unseen maneuvers. I could feel the pushback mounting, more aggressive, more personal. Laura came by one chilly afternoon, face drawn but eyes sharp. "Jason, they're digging into your past," she said, voice low, "trying to find dirt to use against you. They want to break your credibility." I shrugged, trying to sound unconcerned. "Good luck with that." But beneath my calm, a knot tightened. The harassment quickly escalated. Flyers appeared overnight, plastered on car windshields and front doors. They painted me as a troublemaker, a nuisance, disrupting the peace. Emails circulated, twisting facts, spreading rumors. Calls came late at night, anonymous, cold, laced with veiled threats. Neighbors grew uneasy. Some averted their eyes, others whispered in corners. The quiet streets where kids once played freely now felt like a cage. One evening, worn down and restless, I found myself sitting beneath the maple tree by the creek. The water's gentle murmur was a balm to my frayed nerves. The tree stood tall, its gnarled roots clutching earth stubbornly, a living symbol of resilience. I thought about Dad, who'd always said, "Strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time you do." Determined not to let the intimidation win, I doubled down. My smart alarm system, which once simply protected, now became my witness, recording suspicious visitors, logging every interaction. I cataloged every threatening call, every flyer, every suspicious incident. Leah hooked me up with a private investigator, someone experienced in unraveling corporate tactics and dirty tricks. Slowly but surely, evidence began to mount. Coordinated smear campaigns, falsified claims, and a network of intimidation designed to silence dissent. The weight could have crushed me months ago, now it fueled me. One afternoon at the local cafe, Laura slid a folder across the table. "There's more," she said quietly. "Financial documents showing insurance fraud, kickbacks to certain vendors. This isn't just about power, it's about lining pockets." The folder was thick, heavy with secrets. I pored over the papers late into the night. Hidden transactions, suspicious reimbursements, and falsified invoices painted a picture of corruption woven into the HOA's core. Leah reviewed everything, her face grim but resolute. "This isn't just a fight, it's a legal battle against a system rigged to protect itself." The scope of the fight had grown beyond my home, beyond the cedar bench or the winding creek. It was about justice. For every homeowner who'd felt powerless, bullied, or ignored. At a neighborhood meeting, I stood before a growing crowd. The room buzzed with nervous energy, but also hope. I spoke about legacy, about my father's hands that built this neighborhood, about the quiet strength of the maple tree, and the creek that had taught me to stand firm. Voices rose in agreement. Stories poured out of unfair fines, secret meetings, and a culture of fear disguised as community upkeep. Laura stood beside me, once silent but now a beacon of courage. Together we mapped out plans to overhaul the board, demand transparency, and reclaim control. But dark clouds loomed. Simone's name surfaced in whispers. Lawsuits on the horizon, counterclaims ready to strike. One night, walking home past the creek, I felt the old fear creep back. But then I touched the rough bark of the maple tree, grounding myself in its strength. The fight ahead was daunting, but I wasn't alone. The community stood behind me, and my father's legacy carried me forward. No matter what they threw at us, we'd stand tall. The cedar bench creaked softly as the wind picked up, a quiet promise. Roots run deep, and true strength endures. The morning of the HOA board meeting arrived wrapped in an uneasy quiet. The community center buzzed with energy as neighbors packed the room, filling every chair, standing along the walls and spilling into the hallways. Local news cameras flickered in the corners, capturing the crowd's anxious faces illuminated under harsh fluorescent lights. I stood near the back, trying to steady my breathing. The cedar bench on my porch was a distant memory but a steadying thought, a symbol of my family's roots and resilience. Today was more than just another meeting, it was a reckoning. Simone entered last, her presence commanding as always, but this time her eyes darted nervously. The usual smug confidence was missing, replaced by a tight-lipped tension. The loyalists that once rallied around her seemed uncertain, exchanging worried glances. The meeting began, the chairperson announcing the revised agenda, shaped by community demands for accountability and transparency. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. When called to speak, I stepped up, heart pounding but voice steady. "This isn't just about me," I began, locking eyes with neighbors I'd come to know and respect. "It's about every homeowner here, those who've been silenced, threatened, and pushed aside for too long. This is a fight for fairness, for respect, and for justice." I laid out the evidence meticulously, the leaked emails showing Simone's plans to intimidate residents, Meredith's illegal entry caught on security footage, and the financial records revealing fraudulent practices and questionable vendor kickbacks. Each piece landed heavily in the room. The quiet buzz shifted to whispers, then gasps as faces drained of color. Even some board members averted their eyes, unable to meet the crowd's gaze. Then came the recording. Simone's own voice, cold and calculating, discussing ways to make examples out of those who dared resist. The room fell into stunned silence. The power she once wielded was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Simone struggled to respond, fumbling excuses about miscommunication and internal issues, but the damage was irreversible. Her defenses crumbled under the weight of truth. Voices rose as neighbors shared their stories. One woman, her hands shaking, recounted how surprise fines had nearly wiped out her savings. An elderly man spoke of being ostracized simply for questioning the board's decisions. The floodgates opened, tales of secret inspections, threats disguised as community standards, and a pervasive culture of fear and control. The community's pain, once whispered behind closed doors, now erupted into a chorus demanding change. Laura stood beside me, her hand briefly gripping mine in a moment of solidarity, her earlier hesitation replaced by fierce determination. The board, confronted with overwhelming evidence and public outcry, voted unanimously to suspend Simone pending a full independent investigation. Relief rippled through the room, tears and hugs exchanged among neighbors who had long felt isolated and powerless. After the meeting, outside under the pale afternoon sun, neighbors gathered near the creek's edge. I traced my fingers along the rough bark of the maple tree, its twisted roots holding firm despite decades of storms and seasons. Laura leaned in, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "You gave us the courage to stand up, Jason. We needed a voice." I shook my head, humbled. It wasn't me alone. This was all of us, together. That night, back on the cedar bench beneath a sky dusted with stars, I let the weight of the day settle. The journey had been long and arduous, the fights, the betrayals, the unexpected alliances. But this moment was more than a victory, it was a new beginning. Our neighborhood had reclaimed its heart. And as the breeze stirred the leaves overhead, I knew one thing for sure. No matter how fierce the storm, roots that run deep will never break. The air had changed. There was a lightness, a softness to the neighborhood that hadn't been there for months. I found myself back on that cedar bench, the one Dad built with those rough, steady hands. The wood beneath my fingers felt familiar, worn smooth from years of memories. Tonight, it felt like a foundation. Solid, unshakable. Simone was gone, stripped of her power and suspended indefinitely by the new board members. Faces I barely knew but trusted now walked the halls of the HOA, promising openness, fairness, and respect. The suffocating grip of secrecy and control that had weighed on us all was finally loosening. Laura stopped by just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, its golden light casting long shadows over the porch. Her smile was tired, but genuine. "Jason," she said quietly, settling beside me, "you didn't just fight a battle. You helped change this whole neighborhood." I shook my head, the weight of everything still fresh in my mind. We did this. All of us. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the same scents that filled the air when Dad taught me how to stand my ground. I thought about all the times I'd sat here, listening to his stories of hard work and persistence, stories that never seemed far from the challenges we faced now. Change wasn't simple, not everyone welcomed it. Old grudges lingered, and some relationships bore scars that might never fully heal. But beneath those cracks was something stronger: hope. The HOA introduced new reforms. Open forums replaced secret meetings. Fines that had been unjustly slapped on neighbors were reviewed and rescinded. An oversight committee was formed, ensuring decisions were transparent and fair, making sure no one would be bullied or silenced again. Walking toward the creek behind the house, I paused at the maple tree, its twisted roots burrowing deep into the earth. The gentle rush of water reminded me that life moves on, persistent, patient, unstoppable. That tree had weathered storms for decades, and so had we. The neighborhood was healing, one conversation, one handshake, one smile at a time. Houses basked in the golden glow of early evening, and neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, talking openly without fear. I sat back down on the bench and let the quiet wash over me. This fight had been about more than fences or fines. It had been about preserving something deeper: legacy, dignity, justice. And it wasn't just what I'd inherited from my father, it was what I was determined to pass on. As dusk settled, I closed my eyes and breathed in the familiar smells of home: pine, earth, and that worn cedar bench beneath me. A soft breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying a promise. No matter what battles come, no matter the storms that blow, some roots run too deep to ever be broken. Where are you watching from? Have you ever faced a fight like this? With an HOA, a neighbor, or anything that threatened your home or peace? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Let's stand together. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe to keep following this journey and many others like it. The fight for justice, dignity, and legacy continues.